High tech, low tech, or no tech. Through our hobbies and our passions, the geek comes out in us all.
The world's of geekdom.
I am a geek and I'm proud of it.
Geeks.
Geeks unite.
Well, let's get those nerds! Nerds! No!
Did you just call me a nerd?
Not all geeks are nerds.
Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I am twitching in my britches this week again, as I always do when I have very special guests on the show. I have a reoccurring guest today. You can call him a friend of the show, David Murray, the 8-Bit guy. I'm super duper stoked to have him back on the show because you may remember from our previous episode a few months ago that he has developed a game and now he is taking it even further onto even more platforms, and he has a crowdfunding campaign going on for his game. But that being said, David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
So what is the name of your game? And just to recap for listeners who are new, what's the game called, and what was it first initially released on?
Well, it was originally released on the Commodore VIC-20, kind of as a prototype. I called it Planet X1, but I never really finished the game there. And the first real iteration of the game was on the Commodore 64, and it was called Planet X2. And I wanted to create a real-time strategy game for these, 8-bit older machines. Mm-hmm. And, what I'm working on now, of course, is the MS-DOS. I'm going to call it a sequel. I was calling it a port for a while, but it's really a sequel because it's including a lot more features, and it's a lot more complex than the Commodore version was. So, yeah. But anyway, yeah, that's what I'm working on now.
Well, great. Is there any way that listeners can go? Did you do a YouTube video on programming it for the VIC-20? If someone wanted to go and watch this thing from the beginning, do you have a video about that for the VIC-20?
Well, no, but I did show it I did a full video on the Commodore 64 version, and in the very beginning of that video, I talked a little bit about the VIC-20 version and showed what it looked like and whatnot, so you can see it from there.
So what were some of the challenges? That's really cool. I did see the... You titled it, or you described it as sort of a promotional video for your game. I'm guessing that's what you're running on your crowdfunding page. Which crowdfunding site is it? GoFundMe or Indiegogo? Where is
Kickstarter.
It? So it's on Kickstarter. I was gonna ask. It's kind of a separate side note for those who don't know who the 8-Bit guy is. He is like guru, god, maybe less than a god, but more than a man, definitely, at repairing and programming 8-bit computers. And you did a video recently of repairing, was it a VIC-20 that someone found at a yard sale that was covered in like engine oil and grease and stuff? Can you tell us what makes you, is that the worst piece of gear that you've ever brought back to life, would you say?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was in the worst condition. Well, I mean, I've seen computers in worse condition, but I didn't attempt to restore those.
So the normal person who would see a computer, let alone a VIC-20, in the condition that you restored, if they saw it sitting there at the garage sale or in the dumpster or wherever, I'll just say it, nobody in their right mind would think that they can restore it. So the fact that you did was miraculous. And one of my coworkers, actually, one of the news anchors, he came in here, he goes, "Did you see the 8-Bit guy's video restoring that VIC-20? He's a magician. It's crazy." For listeners who haven't seen the video yet, what sort of state was this VIC-20 in? Like, just to paint a picture here on the radio, so listeners know what you brought back to life. What kind of state, was that VIC-20 in?
Well, I think it was used in some kind of production or industrial type environment, probably. I'm guessing is to control some machinery or something like that, probably back during the 1980s or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was covered in dirt and grime and dust and oil. And there was no, like, it didn't look like somebody had just taken oil and poured on it. It was more like it was near something where oil was just kind of permeated in the air a lot. Like maybe it was next to a piece of machine that kind of spit it out, like maybe a little bit of, fog of oil, coming from it over a long period of time.
Particulates.
And it had seeped into the keys, into the motherboard, into everything inside of the computer was covered in that oil and dirt.
Yeah.
And there was keys broken off the keyboard. There were burn marks in the front, like somebody had taken some hot piece of metal or something and rubbed it across front. And there were like these gouged burn marks and stuff, which I managed to file that back into some kind of condition.
It's crazy that you were able to revive that VIC-20, because I think the normal person would see all the oil over it and think that for sure the board had short-circuited. Did you come across any of that on the actual circuit board?
Well, it did have a problem with the board, but it was just a bad RAM chip. There was actually that's one of the things, when I looked at it, I guess because I've worked on cars before, I know that oil is not as difficult to remove as as it might look, especially when it's still somewhat liquid like it was on the board. I mean, I just used some brake cleaner and it just came right, cleared it right off. That wasn't much of a problem.
So,
but yeah, I did take some time to troubleshoot the board though.
I saw that you troubleshot the board. How long did that take? Like a few hours? Would you say you tested pretty much every path in that board, didn't you?
Yeah, I probably spent at least a day and a half troubleshooting that board. That one was more difficult than most. I've repaired a lot of computers, and I don't know. Usually, the problem is more easy to identify than it was on this one. So it was pretty challenging, but it ended up just being a bad RAM chip.
Well, you are a miracle worker, David. I want to get back to the game, because that's what I wanted to have you on the show for. I wanted you to plug it and do everything like that. What state of development is the game right now?
Well, it's somewhat playable. You can't actually win the game or lose the game yet, because it is a real-time strategy game, and I haven't coded any of the AI routines for the enemy yet. I'm still trying to finish all of the player controls and player units and having them do the things that they're supposed to do, but it's pretty far in development. I mean, you could literally sit down and play it for 10 or 15 minutes before you kind of run into an issue of what do I do now, because there's no enemy to fight. But yeah, it's pretty far. It's all still working in CGA mode, but I am supporting the 16-color CGA and Tandy mode, so a lot of people aren't familiar with that mode.
Pretty.
But it looks pretty good, even on CGA. I have not started working on the VGA version, which is what everybody wanted from the beginning, but when I started this game, I looked at the plethora of IBM-compatible machines, when they first came out all the way to when they died out. You're looking at like a 15-year span, and it seems like there aren't that many DOS games coming out today, and the ones that are tend to target the what I would call the higher-end DOS machines, and I really wanted to target those original, like the IBM XT and Tandy 1000 machines, and those machines from the early to mid 1980s. So that's why I'm shooting for the CGA version first, because I wanted to make sure the game was completely and totally playable in CGA with a 4.77 megahertz processor. Right. And then, of course, naturally, I wanted to work on the higher end machines as well. So I'll try to add in some features for those to make the playing experience a little bit more enhanced. But I definitely wanted to make sure that the full game was playable to its fullest extent, even on the low-end machines.
Yeah. What I'm sure you know of this game, Retro City Rampage. Is Retro City Rampage DX or whatever? Do you know what I'm talking about? The DOS game?
I've heard of that. I'm not sure I've seen it. I
think the guy actually it's one of those retro 8-bit looking games. It wasn't first developed to be 8-bit. It was developed for PC, and had all sorts of flashy, I don't know what we call it, layers on it. It just looks retro, but it's not actually 8-bit. But the developer actually ported it to DOS, and to my knowledge, and listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a comment section below whatever podcast app you're listening to this on, I don't think that comes in a CGA mode. So what David is saying is that if you want a true old school, but well, like a modern developed old school DOS game, basically, and other 8-bit, less powerful computers. David's got you covered on that. David, is there a playable version of this that people can check out, like the new version you're working on?
No, I've not made it publicly available yet. I figure I would finish the game first.
Yeah, what a novel idea. I hope game developers, I hope Capcom is freaking listening. Releasing a game when it's finished? That's crazy. You mean there's no you can't buy the beta, pay good money for the beta, and then download the actual the final product when it's done, version 0.1, only to have it broken and have spent $60 on it? Are you telling me, David, that you want to finish the game and have it be good before you want to sell it?
Well, I'm kind of, I don't really have much choice on the matter, actually, because the fact that I have promoted this on Kickstarter, I've already got like $90,000 worth of orders sitting here that I'm basically required to fill. I think if I don't give people a completed game, they're not going to be too happy with me. And since there's not going to be any kind of updates, I can't just, these are on floppy disk, right? I can't just send out some kind of, just download the latest patch or whatever. Now, I can't do that. So it's got to be finished and completed and working and bug-free when it goes out. So, yeah.
What a novel idea. One last thing real quick, David, before I let you plug, just do the official plug. Have you heard any of this quote-unquote scam talk about the Atari VCS? Do you have anything to weigh in on that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Atari VCS?
Yeah, the Atari announced the VCS console, and people on the internet were saying, "Oh, it's a scam. Atari's just scamming us." They reached like a $3 million. They needed a couple $100,000 they're on Indiegogo, and they got $3 million. And there's some big hubaloo over the game footage that they used in the promotional video, and I guess if you haven't seen it yet, then there's not much point.
Well, so when you said the VCS, I was thinking of the original Atari 2600 because that's what it was called. Now, I've seen these little pictures floating around on social media about this new Atari console that I didn't know they were calling it the VCS.
Yeah.
I haven't really read any of the controversy on that. I mean, I saw the picture and I was just kind of like, yeah, that's going to be a failed product.
Yeah, you know what? I would tend to agree to some point. I wish it all the best in the world, but we have so many devices and consoles like that now. Like the Atari VCS really has its work cut out for it. It's going to need some great first-party games, party exclusives for it to even hope to work. I don't think that Atari is scamming us. That's not to say that I don't think that somewhere along the line, even with $3 million of backing, that it might fail at some point. It could or could not. Atari has tried over the past few years to release a console to us to very little effect. So all I can say about Atari VCS is I wish it all the luck in the world, but I don't think Atari is initially trying to scam us. David?
Yeah. That's kind of my opinion. And again, I haven't done a lot of research on the product, but when I first saw it, my very first thought was, well, you've already got the Xbox and Nintendo and the PlayStation, and then of course you've got PC games. And so the market's kind of already well saturated at this point. So if Atari's going to come in with a new game console, they're going to have to offer something that none of the game consoles offered. I don't think that they're going to. I mean, there's not much left you can really add to a game console these days. So not only that, now you've got to compete with Apple, and Android devices, and
yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know that there's any room for another gaming platform unless it were. I've had ideas for a gaming platform, but it would be, like a retro gaming platform, and it would be a very niche audience, but it wouldn't cost near as much to design and manufacture either.
Maybe your next, after this crowdfunding goes well, maybe you could develop some sort of console like that. Is that an idea? Is that a little spark in your brain, maybe?
Well, so I've actually discussed this with quite a few people. The problem is I literally don't have the skills. I know a lot of people think, like you said, like I'm an 8-bit god, and I do know how to program these machines. I know how they work pretty well, but I'm not very good at electronics design work.
Yeah.
And that would take quite a bit of either I'd have to go to school or do a serious amount of self-teaching in order to figure out how to do that. But I do have some good ideas for a product, so yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we're not saying definitely here on Geek Therapy Radio that's definitely in the works, but, you're saying that you wouldn't, thumbs down the idea if you teamed up with somebody who could help make it happen, probably?
Yeah.
It's worth discussing.
That would be accurate.
Yeah, it's worth discussing. David, one last time, plug your game, tell everybody what it's called and where they can go to help you make it a reality.
Okay, well, so it's called Planet X3. It is a real-time strategy game, but it's, I like to compare it sometimes to StarCraft, but mostly just to say how it's different from StarCraft, because that's a game that people are familiar with. But it is a sci-fi type real-time strategy game. It is played primarily with a keyboard, and it is, of course, for MS-DOS. It runs on hopefully any MS-DOS computer. That's the goal, including the original IBM PC 5150. Let's see, what else can I say about it? Well, it's already been funded on Kickstarter. I only needed $30,000 to fund the game, and it's actually over $90,000 at this point.
Wow!
So I've still got like 20 days left to go. So I think that I don't really need to worry about getting it funded. But if you do want to get in on an early copy, then you might want to go put in your order, because one of the problems I ran into with Planet X2 for the Commodore 64 was I did not do any kind of crowdfunding on that, and so I kind of had to reach into my own pocket in order to get the boxes and materials and labels and manuals and all that kind of stuff printed for the game. And unfortunately what happened is I kind of underestimated the demand for it, and so I sold all 500 copies within the first week. And then you might say, well, just order more. Well, the problem was I was kind of faced with a scenario where there's a minimum quantity you have to order on these things in order to get bulk production and bulk production prices. And I didn't feel like I could sell another 500 of that game. And so I haven't had any more box games to sell. And so, that was the reason I did the crowdfunding here, was because that way I would know for sure up front exactly how many to order. That way everybody that wants one can get one. Yeah. And so I'll try to order a few extra, hopefully, so I can sell, when it's complete to anybody who didn't get on in the crowdfunding. But obviously I can't make any guarantees that there will be, enough. So. Yeah.
But this time around you do have the the disc supplier and that kind of stuff kind of more figured out. Yeah. Actually, the floppy disks, the problem I ran into on that with the Commodore version was simply finding floppy disks with blank sleeves. Because I can use any, you can go on eBay and find tons of floppy disks, but a lot of them have branded sleeves, Memorex or BASF or Kodak or something like that. And I didn't want to be able to use those, but I've actually found a manufacturer now who can print custom sleeves for me. So I'll probably just get some 8-bit guy sleeves or something like that, and that way I can just buy generic 5 1/4-inch floppies online. And I've already got a big supply of the 3.5-inch floppies, because I'm going to be able to produce the game on both formats. So depending on how old your machine is, you hopefully will have a disc for each format. Absolutely, David. That's wonderful. It sounds like you got it. I mean, I can't say that everything is completely 100% figured out, because this is business and things can happen, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen in your case. So listeners, go find Planet X3 on GoFundMe and put in your order for it. Is that pretty good, David? Yeah, it's on Kickstarter, not GoFundMe. I'm sorry, Kickstarter. Why the heck was I thinking GoFundMe? Planet X3 on Kickstarter. Thank you, David, for correcting me there. David Murray, the 8-Bit Guy, thank you so much for coming on Geek Therapy Radio. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Well, thank you for having me. And listeners, Planet X3, Kickstarter, go look it up. Go get your, go order your copy today. David, is there a timeline when you plan to start shipping? Well, on the Kickstarter, I gave myself a year, so we're looking at May of 2019. However, I'm really actually hoping it'll be done before then, probably around Christmas time, if all goes well. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I was getting out of the show, but I just have these ideas that keep popping into my head. One more time, David Murray, thank you so much for being on Geek Therapy Radio. All right, well, thank you for having me.